So hi everyone, welcome to another Friday Discovery session. I'm Natalie Irwin, Director of Stakeholder Engagement here at Efficiency Canada. I'm happy you're all here to join me today for what I believe is going to be a very insightful presentation and discussion today, and one that I'm personally passionate about as well. For those that are new, we have asked you to save your questions until the end during the general community discussion period. So this is about 20 minutes, so there's usually plenty of time to get to all our questions after our guest speaker kicks us off with insights on our topic for approximately 20 minutes as well. And we have a pretty hard stop at 12:45 Eastern time so that you can still get back to the rest of your day and those last minute tasks checked off your list before we head into the weekend. So let's get started. It's my pleasure to introduce to you our guest speakers today from StepUp, who will present on a topic, again, I'm personally interested and passionate about. I did write a blog about it. I'm sure everyone here has read it. So how to increase gender diversity can transform, innovate, and improve performance in the sector. So please join me in welcoming Megan Bennett, Director of Communications from the not-for-profit group StepUp, with Isabel Schmidt, Policy Analyst from Foreign Policy. Welcome, Megan and Isabel.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Megan Bennett. I'm so pleased to be here today on behalf of StepUp to bring you today's discovery session. As Natalie mentioned, we're going to explore the importance of gender diversity in the energy efficiency sector. So some quick information about StepUp. We are a volunteer-run non-for-profit that focuses on advancing gender equity, diversity, and inclusion in the energy management sector. Our vision is that we can achieve a breakthrough in Canadian energy management performance by putting gender equity, inclusion, and diversity at the heart of this work. Our mission is to assist organizations involved in energy management to better attract, retain, and advance mid-career women to C-suite and board positions. We were founded in 2019, and we achieve our mission by bringing about cultural workplace change through senior level participation in our field trips and our professional development and networking events, and connecting members through an online community. Our industry events are a source of best practices and knowledge sharing on issues of diversity and inclusion. And we actively promote knowledge building, discussion, learning, and connection. And this is what we're here to do today. We thank our corporate sponsors whose logos are listed here, and proud to be a partner of Efficiency Canada's as well. We have a new website you can go check out, stepup-energy.com, and please follow us on LinkedIn to find out about our next events and how to engage in the work. So for today's webinar, I'm so pleased to introduce our speaker, Isabel Schmidt. Isabel is a policy analyst at Foreign Policy Analytics, which is Foreign Policy's research and advisory division. Isabel completed her master's in international relations at Johns Hopkins University and was one of the lead researchers on the Women as Levers of Change report that came out in March 2020. Research that had compelling findings about the importance of gender diversity in the energy management sector, and definitely got our attention at StepUp. We are so thrilled to have Isabel share the learnings with you today because we think they're really important. I will now pass it over to Isabel so she can get right to it.
Thank you. Hi, thank you so much for having me today. I'm just going to share my screen with you so that you can see my presentation, but there we go. So as Megan said, I am a policy analyst at FP Analytics. So we are the research and analysis division of Foreign Policy magazine, which, if you haven't heard of us, the magazine does what it says on the tin. It reports on foreign policy and international relations around the world. We also have a very cool and amazing events team who have been putting on a lot of different webinars like this one and virtual events since lockdown and quarantining began. And then my division, FP Analytics, publishes reports and briefings, power maps on various topics for a range of clients, including government agencies and private companies. And what you will hopefully see in this presentation is that we do something that feels still fairly unique in the sector, which is we combine qualitative data analysis with quantitative data analysis to really surface the richest findings that we possibly can. And in March of this year, we published new research on the role of women as change makers and innovators in established legacy industry. So these industries are facing increasing pressure from consumers who are looking for more sustainable and socially impactful products, from investors who are taking into account gender factors as well as environmental factors, and from workers, particularly young workers who are becoming the largest share of the global workforce and who increasingly don't want to work for companies that don't reflect their values and align with the way that they're choosing to live their lives. These industries, if they continue as they are, face compromised competitiveness and may become obsolete. And we started this research from the assumption that women represent a really big missed opportunity for these industries. So our study analyzes 14 industries, which you can see here on this slide. And in the energy industry, we looked at oil and gas, coal and mineral mining, and the electric and gas utilities. And we were trying to fill a gap that we noticed in our initial research, which was that there's been a lot of research done on women's underrepresentation in the labor force, including in these specific industries, and theorizing about how their presence might have a positive impact. But we saw there was a gap in terms of quantifying that impact and in terms of surfacing how organizations can really support women to enter the workplace and then to create change within the workplace. So we set out to do just that. So our analysis of over 2,300 publicly listed countries from across the world confirmed our initial hypothesis. Women are substantially underrepresented in these 14 legacy industries. They represent just 21% of employees, 18% of management, and 13% of board members. If we dig into those industries individually, you can see that the numbers are really bleak. So specifically for the electric and gas utilities, you can see here that women represent 24% of employees, which is surprisingly high among these legacy industries, but obviously is well short of that dotted line that represents gender parity and 50-50 employment. In executive management, the numbers drop even further. So in electric and gas utilities, women represent 21% of executive management. And finally, on boards, women represent just 16% in the electric and gas utilities. And I find it interesting and disappointing that even when some of these industries have been able to sustain female representation moving into the executive management level, when you look at boards, the numbers get really, really bleak. They drop a lot. So in addition to exposing just how severe this gender imbalance is, our data analysis aimed to quantify a positive relationship between women's representation and corporate performance. And what we found was that women are contributing to profitability, pushing for greater corporate sustainability and environmental sustainability, and creating inclusive corporate and industry cultures for other women and underrepresented minorities, including racial minorities and people with disabilities. Our data analysis compared the companies with the highest percentage of women in executive management with those with the lowest percentage. And we found compelling evidence for companies to increase female leadership. Those top companies were on average 47% more profitable than the bottom companies, 32% more transparent in terms of ESG disclosure, and had 74% higher ESG ratings. And just to dig into that more, because we're here to talk about energy efficiency and sustainability, the companies which improved the gender diversity of their boards in the period that we were studying, which was from 2013 to 2018, demonstrated 60% greater likelihood of improving their energy intensity and energy efficiency were 39% more likely to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and 46% more likely to reduce their water consumption. And that's in comparison with companies which did not improve their gender diversity on boards within that time period. And we interviewed a number of women who were taking the lead in sustainability practices in their companies and wider industries, who were doing really interesting things, including creating innovative new products which are less environmentally impactful, including microgrids and energy efficient batteries, promoting industry-wide sustainability practices and really keeping industries sustainable, and setting and measuring clear targets for waste reduction within their companies and within broader industries. But obviously, as we saw, despite these very clear positive benefits that women are having where they are present, their numbers still remain low across the board in these legacy industries. We interviewed 160 women, as I said, from across the world and at all stages of their careers. But interestingly, we found that they face a very similar set of barriers, regardless of where they are and how long they've been in the workplace. Major points that were highlighted were difficulty in balancing personal and professional responsibilities, and that's particularly due to the fact that globally women still do the majority of unpaid domestic labor, including childcare and elder care. And many women reported lack of support from their companies when they re-entered the workplace after taking parental or caregiving leave. And additionally, many of our interviewees cited an unwelcoming or hostile culture for women that in many cases drove them out of the workplace or compelled them to start their own businesses where they could create a culture that they felt was more aligned with their values. So finally, a key aspect of this report, and one that was very important to our entire research team, was to make sure that it was actionable. We didn't want to just highlight a problem and say, look, there's a problem here. We wanted to also provide best practices and suggestions for how different stakeholders can build the pipeline of female talent into the workplace, create inclusive workplaces, connect women professionals in the way that StepUp and similar organizations are, and also support female entrepreneurs as they start their own businesses and fill gaps that they've identified in the market. So as you can see, we identified a very large number of stakeholders. We thought that there are many different actors and players in this push to really empower women as change makers. And so this is just a brief rundown of some of the recommendations that we made to each of these individual stakeholders. We wanted them to be action-oriented, highly specific, and applicable to different sizes of organization, things that could be implemented throughout subsidiaries, and just really granular recommendations of what we think needs to be done. We launched the report in March, as I said at the beginning, and since then we've heard from representatives from all of these different stakeholder groups about what they're doing and how the report has been helpful for them. And another thing that's been really gratifying is hearing from a number of our interviewees who have passed on the report to their professional networks, to managers and leadership at their organizations, and are just connecting us to this huge community of women who are already making change and are trying to make more. So I hope you won't see this as a sales pitch if I say that if you haven't read the report, you can access it at womenaslevers-of-change.com. We've got a really beautiful microsite that provides a high-level summary of the findings, and you can also download the full report there, and also executive summaries in 6 languages so that you can share it with anyone that you think would be interested. And I've also included my email on this slide because obviously, hopefully there'll be lots of time to answer questions now, but if you have questions or thoughts or ideas or criticisms, I would love to hear them, and I'm available at that email at the bottom of the slide. So that's it from me. Thank you so much for giving me the time to talk about this work.
Great, thank you so much, Isabel, and thanks as well, Megan. So we're going to open the floor to questions now. So if you aren't familiar with Zoom, you can actually raise your hand and I can unmute you and you can ask your question yourself. Or if you prefer, there's the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So if you just move your mouse over to it, you can see, and I will narrate your question for you. We actually have a question already. Do you have region-specific numbers? The numbers you presented were global, but do you have anything specific for regions like North America or countries?
So most of our data we analyzed in the aggregate just because it does skew towards North America and Europe, and that's for a couple of reasons. One is that our data analysis is based on the Bloomberg Gender Equality Index, which is a voluntary database. So companies voluntarily share the information about their staffing demographics, and that tends to be skewed more towards North American and European headquartered companies. And then for our interviews, we were limited by a language barrier. So the majority of our interviews were conducted in English, which again tends to skew more towards the Western Hemisphere. But I can look into some of the data and get back to you on any specific questions that you have around either the gender representation or the correlations and the specific measurements.
Perfect, and then the questions are rolling in now. Another one actually from Sherry Young on the data is, do you have different ways of leveraging the power of women in more balanced regions to mentor or influence regions without less balance?
That is a really interesting question.
For Isabel or Megan.
Yeah, I will definitely hand over to Megan in a second because I'm sure she has some interesting thoughts on this. But I think something that became very clear through interviewing different women is that mentoring and professional networks, so women's networks like StepUp, have been really important for them in learning about what other companies and other countries do in terms of increasing female representation and then really creating these enabling environments for innovation. I don't think we have any hard data on that, but it definitely came up multiple times as something that our interviewees were really in favor of.
And I think maybe I could just add with online resources and things like webinars and more online, even StepUp, we used to do most of our events in person in the GTA. With opening up to online options now, that may be a way to try to get into spaces and regions that, and even moving geographically into more remote areas and reaching people through events may make it more accessible to do things online. So just a small example that comes to mind.
Definitely, and there's also other organizations that are focused on that, like UN Women, for example. So another question here from Dorothy is, in the short and long term, what are 1 to 3 direct actions organizations or businesses, schools can take to bring women and BIPOC into, in my case, her case, the HVAC field?
That's so interesting. Well, I think one very important thing that came up again repeatedly across the board in different countries was companies can talk all the time about diversifying their workforce and about having no shortlists that are all men, or wanting to hire more people of color, but they can't assume that those people are going to come to them. And particularly if you're looking at, for example, engineering, which is a big role in HVAC as I understand it, those are classes in universities that are predominantly male dominated. They're often very white. And if you don't see people like you in this field, even if you're interested in it, you might not think that it's a space for you. And so something that I think is really important is if you want more women, if you want more people of color, you have to go out and find them. Companies should be recruiting from wider pools than they normally are. They should be going to universities that they potentially don't always recruit from. In the US, I think that where there is this legacy of historically Black colleges and universities, your company should be at the career fairs there. You should be reaching out to people at community colleges, or in the UK getting BTECs, for example. And I think really taking that extra step to show people that they are welcome and wanted in these communities. And then, yes, from there, you want your interview panels to be diverse. You want to make sure that you're open to different kinds of experiences and potentially people with work experience that's not at the most prestigious companies. One tip that I thought was really interesting that the head of a water utilities company in the UK told me about was she has taken qualifications out of her job descriptions. So instead she posts the qualities that she's looking for and the responsibilities that people will have. And she said that she's found she has a much higher rate of applications from women and from people of color because of that.
It's very interesting. I don't know, Megan, I'm sure you have some things you'd like to share on that.
It makes me think of one of the launch event, the first event that StepUp did was around unconscious bias, and that was really eye-opening for me. So in terms of things that organizations can do, one thing would be to do a workshop, do some learning, do some reading, doing some work from a recruiting and a hiring and a management perspective around unconscious bias and how it shows up for us in different ways around age, race, experience. So getting familiar with that work and doing the work ourselves, I think, is an important first step.
Yeah, and recognizing, I think, the unconscious bias is a big part of it as well, and recognizing the fact that it's okay to have an unconscious bias. Like, it's unconscious. That's why you have it. Yeah. You're not doing it on purpose. Exactly, exactly. And I think
it's about bringing it to the consciousness, like making it,
Exactly. And I can kind of share a few things at Efficiency Canada, just our experience as well, is that we recently completed an internal GEM analysis of ourselves, and we're going to be sharing it with the extended group after we discuss it internally and link to it. And it's really a look at yourselves and what you could be doing better, and then recommendations. And it is a free online tool, which is, it was really great because even though we are conscious of it, there was a lot of things that we could be doing better. One of the things that, and I'm going to share this with everyone here, is that just removing names from CVs when they come in, so that you have no idea where they are located or what a name. A lot of times it will show where their ethnicity as well as gender. So just taking that right off the CV, but then also making sure that we have a diverse set of applicants. So if it's all the same type of people, then realizing we need to go out to different, like what Isabel was saying, go to different schools or going to different areas that we normally don't reach out to, reaching out to different groups to make sure that the applicants are a diverse set. So those are just some things that we could be doing as well, which is, really insightful for us. And then the other thing I'll say, Isabel, your point about how a lot of times women in a lot of these male-dominated sectors, energy efficiency being one of them, is that you don't have role models. So we're, based on one of the earlier webinars for the discovery sessions that we had this year with Shauna Henderson from Blue House Energy, who was talked about becoming an energy advisor. That was one of our most popular sessions, actually. And so we're going to be creating, starting in September, I believe, a monthly session, a becoming series, and just talk about how to become the different, I guess, roles in energy efficiency and really promote those and make a conscious effort to make sure that there's women in the non-typical women role, so that people can see, so younger women can see themselves in that role. So that's something that Efficiency Canada is doing, which I'm really proud of. I'm going to get to some more questions here. Do we need, Dorothy has another great question, do we need male allies, and do we need policy changes? Do we need to market the skilled trades differently? So there are kind of three questions in there.
I mean, my answer to all three is yes. I think just working backwards, some of my favorite interviews that I did for this project were with a couple of skilled trades apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship organizations. One of them was operating in New York, and one in Oregon, and then one in Dublin in Ireland. And no one when I was growing up told me that it was possible to be a welder or a bricklayer or work on a construction site. And the women that I was speaking to just loved their jobs and really saw it as an amazing way to do something different every day and be outside and work with your hands. And I definitely think that I at least default to the idea that the skilled trades are a man's job, and they just don't need to be. And I think that comes a lot with the way that they are marketed, particularly to young people. But frankly, I think you can retrain into that at any age. I have definitely been thinking about, in the midst of a pandemic, reskilling, becoming a carpenter, something like that, something really useful. And then, I think male allies are incredibly important, and particularly in these industries that are still so highly male dominated. It was really wonderful to hear about the women's networks and the spaces that women were creating for themselves and their organizations. But every single one of them had a male colleague or a manager who they credited for really supporting them to achieve their career goals, creating space for them, really acting as an advocate for them in the workplace. And I do think, at least until these spaces are more equitable and more welcoming, men should continue to be a really, really important source of support and allyship for women. And one of my big regrets about this project is that we interviewed 10 men, because we got to the end and we were like, oh, everyone's been talking about how male allies are really important and asking us if we've been interviewing them, so maybe we should. And it's this I would love to do more research where we talk to men about how best to bring them into this work and how to really appeal to them and how to support them supporting women, because I think a lot of these people are really keen to help and be a part of this movement and just don't know where to start or how to get involved.
Yeah, Megan, can you share what StepUp is doing around that?
Yeah, so our priority is really, we really aim to get at least 30 to 40% of participants in our events to be men, because we believe that it's important that that we're engaging with everyone, and that that male allies are so important, and that this is all of our work. And so, StepUp, even though our mission and vision is around gender equity, we really are aiming to increase the gender diversity of our board and our members and our committees and everyone that comes out to our events. So it's definitely part of the way that our approach and what we see is going to be critical is that gender diversity in the work as well.
Perfect, thank you for that. I'm just reading the questions here. There's a lot of questions that are coming in that are policy questions, and I know I'm not a policy expert in energy efficiency, but not in gender studies. So just I want to keep that in mind for our panelists and myself for the questions coming in. So you can share your opinion, but it's not necessarily an expert opinion. So under the calls for action for employers, your recommendation is to collect data, set targets, and to create a roadmap that sets a long-term plan and takes actions. What pragmatic recommendations do you have for employers to take right away?
So I think a lot of this is dependent on organizational size and resources. One of the most sort of comprehensive programs that I heard about is there is a Swiss NGO called Equal Salary, and you can bring them into your company and they will conduct this like huge analysis of the gender wage gap in your company. And so they do an analysis that's like data analysis, so in terms of working out where those gaps are, and they also interview people at all stages of your organization about the culture that they see, whether they feel like this is a place where they are supported and where diversity and gender diversity are like enshrined in their internal policies and actions, and frankly in the work that they do out in the world. But that's obviously quite a that's a major overhaul. That's a big thing to do. And if you're a small company, if you're a startup, that might not necessarily be the thing that you can do straight away. I do really recommend getting a clear picture of the diversity and statistics and demographics within your organization. I think measurement is just one step, but I do think it's a very important step because it will make it easier for you to pinpoint where action needs to be taken. Just as kind of a generalization, in a lot of these companies, women tend to be concentrated in sales or HR. And so if you are aware of that sort of imbalance, then potentially you know that you don't need to focus on those areas as room for improvement, but that you might want to look more into your engineering staff, for example, or your financial team. And so I think the measurement is a very important step.
And I'll just add two kind of places to start would be to look at the Equal by 30 campaign that helps to set commitments to show that your company is committed to equal pay, equal roles and responsibilities, and equal opportunity for men and women in this industry. It's a great place to start. It's not going to provide all the answers, but it helps to set up some systems around accountability and bring this to the agenda of your company's leadership. So that I think is a good place to start. Also, EHRC's Leadership Accord on Gender Diversity, also another good place to start from having the discussions and taking that leadership to look into how are we going to activate this in our own companies, our industry.
Good responses. So I'm going to ask these next questions to the two of you, but I'm also going to open this to the group if anyone knows, because I feel like this, if anyone has any studies or reports on this, feel free to comment, but also just open for general discussion and opinions on this. And it's okay to have an opinion on this. We're talking about marketing to the trades, and do we need to market the trades differently in order to increase the number of females in that particular sector? So feel free, the two of you can answer that, or I'm going to open it to the floor. So feel free for anyone to answer that, and you can raise your hand.
Yeah, I'll quickly say, I'm sure people have really interesting comments and experiences on this, but I chatted to a woman, actually the woman who works in Dublin. She started a network for women in the trades, and something that she has spent a really long time on is she's created a database of photos of women, tradeswomen. So rather than stock photos or models, this is real women doing their real jobs in their real PPE. And she's made that database available to publications in Ireland, and you can email her and request to use it. And she said that she gets a lot of people reaching out to her and saying that they'd never seen a woman in a lot of these situations, and that they've been interested in construction or a different trade and hadn't thought that it was something they could do, and that those photos had really made a difference to the way that they pictured themselves and pictured the trades.
Yeah, that's great. It's just seeing yourself as a role model. I know that's a big one. I think all our audience is shy. Oh, so Dorothy's answering that question just in the chat here. She's saying, I think the answer has to be yes. I think that if the trades are positioned as a way to contribute to addressing climate change, such as building better, or the hashtag that people are using is building back better, and carbon reduction, that we would attract more females to the sector. It's an interesting thought there, Dorothy. I think that's, it'd be interesting to do a study on that. Another question here from Sherry Young is, does getting men into female-dominated fields help get women into male-dominated fields? So are there any studies in the mutual relationship or influence between these two versions of gender diversity?
Wow, that is such an interesting question. And it's one that I don't have a full answer to. This obviously is not specifically what we were looking into. I will say that I've read a couple of studies in the last couple of years, specifically around salaries and wage gaps, that found that as men enter female-dominated fields, the wage gap gets worse and remains skewed towards men. Which I think was quite specifically about like the caring professions, so medicine and nursing and elder care and things like that. And so it might be different in different fields, but those are obviously some of the most female-dominated professions, at least in North America and in Europe. I would be really interested to know if anyone's read anything about that specifically.
Mm-hmm. I don't know, Megan, do you have anything to add? Or there's so much that we don't know about this topic as well. So there's lots to discuss for sure.
Yeah, I hope we're going to be able to do more work along these lines. Like, I think even we looked at 14 industries, we could do a 50-page report on each of them individually. There would be ample material. And I think questions like that are just so fascinating and really deserve answering.
Mm-hmm. I know I can share just anecdotally. So my sister actually moved to Sweden. So she lives there now, and she's been there for about 2 years now. And just her observations being a Canadian living there and really noticing the difference is that for their maternity leave or paternity leave, they get 18 months, but a certain number of months has to be taken by the partner. So it can't be the same partner that takes 18 months. And she said she notices it very common, or I guess not uncommon, to see men walking together with babies in prams just walking around. And she said it's versus in North America, you don't see groups of men with babies doing that together very often. Whereas there, no one gives it a second thought. So that was just something that, just her observation on that. So I think that's interesting that they have that mandatory, I guess, not mandatory paternity leave, but mandatory, if you're going to take the longer, that it is mandatory for both to have the option to take it.
And that kind of runs into the question about childcare reductions and closures during COVID and the disproportionate impact this is having on women. Like this is critical and really concerning. And I've heard and seen articles talking about how this is going to be a step back for women, and that's tough. So yeah, what recommendations to address this current and real impact? It's a really good question. Open to others. I don't necessarily have an answer, but yeah, it's a concern.
It's interesting and it's difficult because we're also looking at an unprecedented level of remote work right now, which has obviously always been put forward as this like huge equalizer and this way of giving freedom to women, that they might be able to, that they could work from home more often and take care of their childcare responsibilities at the same time. And I think what we're seeing is that that misses the rather larger point that like childcare is this huge community effort of schools and childminders and parents and cousins and sisters and brothers that we don't have access to right now.
That's a good point. There's a question here, I guess a comment from Susan is for Isabel is she appreciates the research you looked into and representation of women in legacy industries. She's just curious, and I'm as well, have you or your firm done any research on the numbers of women working in renewables and alternative energy industries? She's heard anecdotally that and observed that more young women are attracted to alternative energy industries as it's more value-based and transcends the barriers experienced in the traditional industries.
Yeah, so we don't have specific data on female representation in those industries, but anecdotally, I can also report that a large number of our interviewees in the energy sector were working in or wanted to work in renewables and energy efficiency. And actually something that I thought was really interesting was that they continually talked about the fact that renewables are so much less conservative. Like the workplaces are less stuck in their ways and established, and they felt like they had a lot more freedom to innovate and to create styles of working that worked for them, which I thought was a really interesting insight that I hadn't necessarily considered. There is research into whether women are more committed to sustainability and preventing climate change. I wish that there was more research on it because it's all quite small samples, light anecdotes. I saw a study that's cited in a lot of places that says women are much more concerned about climate change than men. And when I finally made it back to the original study after playing like link tag, it was from a survey, and one of the questions was just, are you concerned about climate change? And it was like very yes, not really, no, definitely not. And just more women had clicked yes or very concerned, which is obviously how we start creating these hypotheses, but it was a small sample, and I would love to see more.
Yeah, I know that
that
there's a group in Canada, but they have chapters all over the world now. I think they just launched one this week or last week in Dubai. It's a group called WIRE, so Women in Renewable Energy, that focuses in getting more women in renewable energy, and they do events, and a lot of them are moving to online now, and they're actually just open to women to attending, which I thought was very interesting because and I talked to their executive director, and she said that she found the reason that they're doing it just for women is that a lot of women are intimidated to come out to events, and even if they do come out, they don't network and they don't talk to others and they don't ask questions, whereas if it's just other women in the room, they're not as shy and they're not as limited, which encourages them to even especially new ones that are looking or interested in getting into the field. So I thought that was a really interesting point of view on why they've moved forward doing that. So on that note, I'm just cautious of our time when we have a hard stop. So I'm going to end right now. So thank you so much for the presentation and insights to Isabel and Megan today. And thank you again for the challenging discussion that we've had. There's a lot that we know, but a lot that we don't know and would love to know, as always. So thank you for joining us today. And also a reminder to everyone on today's webinar to sign up for our unprofessional networking events on Fridays at noon. So at this time at noon for the 4 weeks in August. And you can find them under our event tab on our website. But until then, I hope you join me next Friday along with our guest speaker from the Atmospheric Fund, who will share their vision for a new kind of retrofit agency that will help Canada achieve our vision for retrofitting all homes and buildings by 2050. So another fantastic topic. I'm really excited. So enjoy your weekend, and thanks again for joining. Bye, everyone.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.